Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. For those of you watching on YouTube, yet another faultless, technically perfect, on-time launch of the world's best-produced internet show. I'm Bill Whittle. Somebody says they've got no audio. Martin says he has no audio, but we'll have to worry about that later. We had a little bit of an issue, which was fixed by rebooting the computer. So anyway, that's that. We're back. Good to be here. Had a real moment of just genuine joy earlier today. Sometimes it happens. I've been working on been a tough week. It's just been like completely, I don't even want to say overloaded. I've been underloaded, underwhelmed. Sometimes this last week or two, I feel like somebody drained all the blood out of me and just replaced it with compressed air. It's just like, just kind of going through the motions. So I think we're probably going to have to go back to doing live Moving Back to America shows. I thought I'd write them, but it's tough to write them. However, I did write one for tomorrow, so we'll get at least one out this week. Much like last week's thing with the alien thing, it's going to have, it's going to be like basically going to be a firewall. But I had, as I said, a moment of genuine joy today. This kind of feeling happens when I do a little research on something and a number pops up. And I remember I felt this way when I did number one with a bullet, and I was looking at the murder rate of the United States versus the gun ownership rate, and it was like, wow. So just as a preview for what will be coming out tomorrow afternoon, this week I'm going to be talking about the inherent racism of the National Park Service, based on an article in the... let me rephrase that. It's not the racism of the National Park Service. It's the inherent racism of the National Park system. And it just, one of these things that just kind of made me smile. So just as a preview for coming up tomorrow, let me tell you where I'm going with this. So this ABC News report was talking about how racist the National Park Service is. Too white, they said. And so I took a look at the statistics that are in this piece, and I'll run the clip tomorrow. But just since we're dealing with statistics, here's the problem with America and its hideous racism. According to the ABC News article, they said that that this is the attendance in the National Park Service. And before I get any further with this, I chose that expression because they kept referring to people of color, and I thought about that term, and I realized, people of color is a term that basically encompasses the entire human family. Everybody from Eskimos to Africans, if you're Latin American, if you're Asian, Pacific Islander, Middle Easterner, everybody in humanity, all of the human family is part of people of color, except for white people. They're the only ones that are not included. It is literally everybody else. So I decided to go with people of color, and then realizing what they're trying to do with the whole word of people of color, it basically means there are people of color, and then there are non-people of color. Anyway, this is the catastrophe. This is the general population. 42% of the American population are people of color. But when you get to the national parks, this is the nightmare that awaits America. So even though 42% of the country is people of color, only 23% of those people in the actual national parks are people of color, therefore racism. And I thought there might be some other explanations for this. And I thought, well, clearly it's racism. What else could it be? Couldn't have anything to do with location, could it? So I just did another Google search using that tool of white supremacy, logic, and curiosity. And here's what I found out. The this is the breakdown of population between people of color and non-people of color in urban areas. And here is the money shot. And here is the ratio of people of color versus non-people of color in rural areas. Now, this will all be much clearer tomorrow, but to give you an idea of why I'm just so tickled pink, this is what rural America looks like. And this is what national park attendance looks like. And as you will be able to see in just a moment, well, I'm really a mess with this today, aren't I? Here's the park population on the right, and then on the left is the rural population. Come on, Bill. Everybody understand? On the left is the population in terms of rural population, white versus minorities. And on the right is the catastrophe of our national parks and how racist they are. And based on this chart, you can see that my response to the ABC News article is that while people of color only make up 23% of the national park population, as opposed to 47% of the general population, people of color make up 22% of the rural population, which means that the national parks are actually overrepresenting people of color if you deal with a national park as a function of who lives close enough to conveniently drive to one. Get it? When I saw those numbers line up like that, I realized, oh, what that's really saying is that if you look at the fact that national parks are in rural areas, then it turns out that there are more people of color in national parks than there are in the surrounding communities, in the neighborhood of the national parks. White people are underrepresented in the national park system if you look at everything like within an hour's drive from a national park system. Now, obviously, that is incredibly racist. It's racist of the white power structure to not have created any national parks inside of America's cities. And this is the kind of problem that makes me convinced that the struggle is real, obviously. But I have to tell you something. I saw those numbers earlier today, and I knew that this whole thing was invented, hysteria. But when I saw the numbers line up like that, I just realized that not all of it, but that these stories are so manufactured. And ABC News was just, aghast at the racism still inherent in America. That while the national population is 1 out of 3 people of color, the national park population is 1 out of 4. 1 out of 4 Americans managed to sneak past the racial barriers and checkpoints that we have set up to preserve our last bastion of white supremacy here in America. And then, as I said, when I did a quick look at what the rural versus urban population looks like, I realized, now, is it because ABC News isn't smart enough to do this fundamental basic calculation? Or is it that they're too evil to mention this mitigating fact? It can be both, It can be both. We did 2 shows earlier today with Zoe, 2 more virtue signals earlier this afternoon. And they were both terrific, and they were both considerably longer. They were probably 30, 40-minute shows each, I guess, something like that. And one of the shows talked about something I saw yesterday when I was just staring at the wall. And it was a 60 Minutes episode from just a couple days ago. And I forget the guy's name, and I don't need to remember it. But it was a major in the Air Force, a black pilot in the United States Air Force, who is on 60 Minutes talking about how he's getting out of the Air Force because of the racism. He couldn't handle it. And this guy flies F-22 Raptors. And he's leaving the Air Force to attend Harvard Law School. And when they asked him their probing questions about, can you tell us any incidents of the racism that forced you to leave the United States Air Force, this F-22 pilot said, well, they're always trying to get you to conform to their way of doing things. Imagine the horror that I experienced when I heard that. He said his squadron mates didn't treat him the same as the other guys. And everybody is just clucking their tongues and clasping their pearls in the comment section about how evil this country is. But it did make me wonder as I was watching it whether or not the treatment that his squadron mates were giving him might have been based upon the fact that he was given a billet flying F-22 Raptors, and he's probably been complaining the whole time about how unfair this is. And if you're ready to walk away from the let me put it to you a little more plainly. This is what I meant to say. If you really have your heart set on being a fighter pilot and you're flying F-22s and you say that you can't stand it anymore because people told you that you were too loud, and sometimes they tell you that you're too quiet, then maybe your heart's not really in it. So I had this conversation with Zoe today, and it was an in-depth conversation, nearly half an hour. It's long for one of those shows. And the thing that interested me the most was looking at the comments section on this ABC News report, because by a factor of 15 or 20 to 1, they were, this is appalling. How can such a thing happen in an age like this? The Air Force just lost one of its best men. You, sir, are going to go on and succeed no matter what you do, regardless of the racism that you've been facing, and on and on and on and on and on. But a number of comments, probably 10 or 15 at least, in the couple hundred that I read, were from other black service people saying they were experiencing the same thing. And I thought, well, that's a significant percentage, a significant number. So is this real? I don't know. When black people say that you can't see the racism, there's no question about that. I don't argue that. But at the same time, I know that, just as an example, I had a friend who was in the Air Force back in the 80s. And he was an air traffic controller and a sergeant, and he was responsible for training new controllers. And he said on a number of occasions, he would either issue instructions or corrections, and when somebody's about to crash two airplanes together, no matter what color they are, that's usually something you want to react to relatively quickly and aggressively. Then he said on a number of occasions, just doing standard instruction, he got written up for being racist because he was overly mean to somebody when he was trying to explain to them that if you do this and that, then these two jets are going to collide. And the only reason he could be that mean and condescending was because of his racism. This was reports from black airmen underneath him in the air traffic control tower. So we had a long conversation about this, and we tried to figure out how much of this is real and how much of it isn't. And I suppose they're both true. I suppose there is. I suppose that there's certainly something that all these black servicemen are reacting to, and at the same time, I also think there's. I think they're reacting to something real, and at the same time, I think they're overreacting to a lot of things that aren't real. And the thing about it is that we only hear one side of that story, and that's the part that really pisses me off, honestly. Because if this was actual news, and if this was fair, and if it was reasonable, first of all, he would have had to come forward with actual charges. But he didn't. He just said, they made me feel uncomfortable. And they said I was too intimidating. And then they said I wasn't intimidating enough. and they wanted me to conform, and they wanted me to, and I thought, give me some examples. Give me specific examples, because you're a young man, highly educated, extremely well-spoken, and you're flying F-22s. That is, I think you could argue, the single greatest in-demand job in the world if you're a pilot. I think I can make a good case for that. That if you want to be a fighter pilot, that flying F-22 Raptors, of which there is a limited number and there will never be any more, if you got to fly Raptors, I'm having a hard time understanding where the institutionalized prejudice is that caused you to have to leave the Air Force for Harvard Law School. I kind of think there's a possibility that perhaps this guy realized that if he's going to go to Harvard Law School because of the racism, the fact that he's on 60 Minutes on national television talking about how racist America is, I would imagine that would be a boost if you were thinking about getting into politics or something like that. In any event, I was watching it and it just made me sick, What made me sick was not the charges, because if that exists, then that's got to be dealt with. But what made me sick was watching this reporter just nodding, and this major in the Air Force is going, yeah, well, really, really made me terribly uncomfortable, and I could only stand it for 11 years, and I had to get out. Oh, it must be terrible. In the comment section, bam, 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 bam. You poor man. Oh my God, this makes me sick. I can't believe it. How can we do this in this day and age? Blah, 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 all the way down the line. And I thought, what is the actual charge? What is the charge? He didn't have any. Did he say, on this occasion, I went to my commanding officer and he said, don't bother me with this stuff, boy, don't you know? Nothing specific, just things that he said he felt. And there was no other side of the story. There was no pushback. There was no questioning, nothing. Just this slathering kind of acceptance of it, and that's what bothered me. I'm not saying that there's not unseen racism to some degree. I'm not. I am saying if you're flying F-22 Raptors, and you're saying that this is bad enough for you to get out of the service, you better provide some specific examples so that court-martial proceedings can be put in place against the individuals who committed these crimes, or you ought to toughen up a little bit. When I got to the thing that I'm going to release tomorrow, the National Park Service thing I saw, this national tragedy that's unfolding before our very eyes, about how people of color are being prevented from enjoying the national park system. The expert that they went to was a probably early 20s young woman, and she was angry. And the second she came on, before I said a word, she said a word. I said, that person is an activist. And she's wearing a T-shirt that says immigrant. And here's what she's saying. She's saying, the person who's claiming that the national park system, the whole system is racist. She says, people of color go to national parks and they don't see anybody that looks like them out there. And it's intimidating. It's intimidating. And it makes us feel unwelcome. And I heard that and I said to myself, in 2012, I went to Thailand. And when I got off the plane in Bangkok and got on a bus for Pattaya, I was surrounded by Thai people. I was the only white person on the bus. I was completely surrounded by Thais. And I didn't say to myself, I don't feel safe here. I said to myself, I'm surrounded by Thais. There are no Americans here. Which is why I came to Thailand in the first place, because I wanted to experience something different. Because that's what travel is going places where people are other than yourself. And using this logic that this woman has to justify this horrible racism in America, then I would have been 100% within my rights to say, no, I'm not going to Thailand until those racist Thai people make sure that from the time I get out of the airplane until the time I get to my hotel, I have nothing but a group of white Americans, white American males, white American heterosexual males, have to be placed along the route so that I don't get uncomfortable. Because if I get uncomfortable, you see, I'll feel threatened. And the country, we are watching the country being run by neurotic infants. And this is the thing I cannot understand and I cannot process. I don't see how it's happening. I really think that, well, I've got a theory about this. When you're watching bad television or bad movies, but mostly bad television, like series TVs, like Vikings or something, and you'll see like a battle, let's say, or a shootout or something like that. And everybody is dying everywhere except for your key characters. And when it's not handled well, you can tell, oh, look, everybody else is just being killed except for them. Arrows flying everywhere. Any of our guys getting hit? Nope. The expression we use is that they're wearing, the reason that they're not hit by arrows or shot down is because they're wearing plot armor. And plot armor is what's protecting them. And the plot armor is they're not being shot or injured because the plot needs them to be here for the next scene. And what I think it is that the people that are doing this are not wearing Under Armour. They're wearing underdog armor. I really think that's it. I really do. I think that the reason that 2 or 3 or 4% of the country is dictating to the rest of us that we all have to be as bat guano crazy as they are is because, and the reason that we're listening to them and they're getting away with it is because they're wearing underdog armor. And underdog armor is the belief that if you are the underdog or the outsider or the minority, you are automatically morally correct. And the fact that you're an underdog, meaning either in the traditional sense, like a person who's facing long odds, or if you're a minority, or if you have a different sexual orientation than the majority of the population, the assumption is that if you are different, you are morally correct. And furthermore, that you are being actively oppressed, that people are actually oppressing you. And that's why you're in the minority. That's underdog armor. And when I was writing the last line in this thing for tomorrow about the National Park Service, I was thinking about this woman who said, yes, we can't go there because we don't see people who look like us, and so we feel uncomfortable. I realized it's time for another one of my laws of politics. The first one is, Whittle's first law of politics is, if you see an event, a staged event or an announcement of any kind, and the optics of which are so terrible, then the explanation is because the optics of any other option would be worse. That's a little kludgy, but there you go. The second one that I came up with today is much pithier. And this is the closing for this one. If there is no coercion, then you are not oppressed. I really think that's got it. I think that ought to be our mantra, because I think that's really gets it right in the heart. If there's no coercion, then you're not oppressed. If there's somebody keeping you from going to the national parks, if you want to go to the national parks, if there's a checkpoint or a border or some kind of a test or something based on your race, that's coercion and you are being oppressed. But if there's nothing preventing you from doing something other than your own neuroses, that's not oppression. That's mental illness. And that's what it comes down to. So I think that ought to be the measure that we deal with all of these issues from now on when we're trying to deal with this underdog issue. Is there coercion? Because if there's not coercion, then there's no oppression. There's just hurt feelings, or not even hurt feelings. There's just discomfort. And this is why we are why we're just drowning here, because people are appealing to our sense of decency and our sense of the underdog and convincing us that we're wrong, convincing us that the majority of the population is evil. That's what they're trying to tell us, and the reason they're getting along with it, as far as they are, is because we are wired in this country and around the world. Yeah, Dave Big Booty got it right. You're not oppressed. You're butthurt. That's exactly right. That's it. It's precisely right. You're not being oppressed. You're just butthurt. You're just crying. This underdog armor is very pernicious, and this is the thing that I think people need to realize. Everybody, not just Americans, not just present-day Americans, human beings throughout history, learn through stories. That's how we learn everything. The Bible's a collection of stories. Aesop's fables are collections of stories that teach us the fundamentals of morality. And things like Mother Goose stories and stuff used to not only teach us right from wrong, but taught us what to be afraid of and what not to be afraid of. And sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you is a kind of a story we learn through stories. All of it. And so when you see a movie, and how many times have we seen this? There's some, I forget who said it, but somebody said something to the effect of rooting for the Yankees is like rooting for General Motors or something. If you've got a team or a group that's in a position of power and there's a competition going on, and one team is very, very strong and the other team is relatively weak, there's nothing wrong with that, and that's how the world works in real life. But if you're trying to tell a story, if you're telling the story of how a group of amateur prisoners take on an NFL team and the NFL team defeats them 193-0, that story's not really worth telling. That kind of story only works if it turns out that the underdog team, the prisoner team, either beats the pros or comes close enough to beating the pros so that it's a win from a moral plane. And so all of the stories we hear, all of them are about the underdog. Luke Skywalker is an underdog. The Rebel Alliance are underdogs. And we can play this game forever and ever and ever. Amen. Underdog, underdog, underdog. Protagonist, protagonist, protagonist. And in the case of Star Wars and Luke Skywalker, the reason that the rebels are the underdogs is because the other team is evil. And this is how we're wired, and this is what they're using against us. They are using underdog armor. When you see a picture, the famous one from, close to 20 years ago now or something, you see a picture of a tank with its gun aiming straight at a 10-year-old boy, and the 10-year-old boy is throwing a rock at that tank. Most people will immediately identify with the kid. And because of that, we assume that the kid's got to be in the right. But in that particular picture, as in many others, that ain't it. That kid's not in the right. The people in the tank are in the right. And one way you can tell that the people in the tank are in the right is because there's no follow-up image of the boy throwing a rock being reduced to red mist. That's how you know that you might be dealing with good guys in the tank. Because if they were really the bad guys in the tank, then this kid would be he'd just be a greasy stain on the road. We're wired for this. And nobody wants to be the person to say that this racism doesn't exist because nobody wants to make that. They can't just come out and say, no, it doesn't happen. Because to some degree it happens. But no one else is saying, yeah, but how much of it is real? How much of it is perception? How much of it is a simple attribution to racism out of it, just an oversensitivity when everybody else gets these kind of criticisms? One of the comments I saw repeatedly on that story about the Air Force major from black servicemen, I can tell from their little avatars, it was like that for me in the Navy. It was like that for me in the Navy. I was in the Army. I saw this and said, I can't disregard that this is real. However, two of those cases said that, yeah, it's the reason that you have to get out of the services if you're black is because the military expects you to act white. And now we're on the main vein. What does that mean? So the two shows we did with Zoe today, just earlier today, I think one of them will be out tomorrow and the other one probably Monday. The first one was about institutionalized discrimination, how much of it's real and how much of it isn't. And the second thing specifically was about acting white. If progressives are now saying that people of color, that would be the human family, all of us together, except for white people. People of color shouldn't be expected to get the right answer in mathematics because that's racist. That's part of the white supremacy. It's white supremacy to demand that you get the correct answer. It's white supremacy to demand that you show your work. And this is it. And leave it to Zoe to point out that those statements have white supremacy inherent in them. These are progressive statements. When somebody says that people of color should not be required to get the right answer, needless to say, the obvious thing is, okay, you're saying that they shouldn't have to get the right answer because you're saying you don't think they can get the right answer. But what Zoe pointed out was, and he's really on it, is think about just the ego stroke of the white person saying that. The ego stroke of a white person saying, no, of course not. It's racist to expect that people of color should have to get the right answer. Think about that. Every time white liberals talk about minorities as being oppressed, what they're saying today, I'm not saying there wasn't real oppression before, I'm talking about now. What they're saying is these people are oppressed and it's up to us to do something about it. It's up to white Americans to do something about it. That was that entire thrust of that national park article, was there's not enough people of color in the parks and it's up to white America to address this imbalance. What they're saying is that minorities are not capable of going to national parks, or they don't know about national parks, or any number of other things, and it's up to white people to go out and basically grab them and carry them into it. And Roy Hamill beat me to it in the live comment section by a fraction of a second, because this is the exact essence of what in the 19th century was known as the white man's burden. This is what the British Empire talked about when they had an empire. The sun never sets on the British Empire. When the British had colonies in Africa, India, Middle East, Hong Kong, and so on. And they ruled those colonies. That was oppression because that was coercion. They justified all of this by saying, well, this is the white man's burden. It's the job of white men to go out there and uplift these other races. And the reason they said that was because they just assumed that the whites were superior to these other races. So it's the white man's burden to go out and raise these other poor races to civilization. And all of these progressives who talk about how evil that is and how condescending it is, and it is, are saying exactly the same thing. They're saying exactly the same thing. We shouldn't have to be held to the same standards that white people are held to. And as I pointed out to Zoe today, trying to earn my pay on that show, as I pointed out to him, I said, that dynamic is a racist dynamic that is grafted onto a deeper dynamic that's got nothing to do with racism at all. Because that is the dynamic of laziness. When you hear black people criticizing other black people for acting white, that's no different. They'll claim that's about racism, but it's not about racism. It's about envy. Because if you have, I know I've been subjected to this, and needless to say, it left me so scarred that I'm waiting for a government check. But if you have a classroom that's entirely filled with white kids, and 2 or 3 white kids are constantly have their hands up every time the teacher asks for an answer, then sooner or later, at least in American schools, The rest of the class is going to make it clear to those kids in no uncertain terms that you raising your hand with the answer all the time is making me look bad. Stop acting so smart. Keep your hand down, or else we're going to pound the living daylights out of you. You are making us look bad. And somebody works really hard in a, I don't want to say necessarily a unionized kind of thing, but you get the idea. You got a bunch of people who are used to slacking off. Some new person comes in there and starts working hard. The rest of the people say, stop succeeding because you're making us look bad. We're all going to have to start to work harder now because you are showing people what we're capable of doing. And that is exactly the dynamic. That's what it's about. It's people who either can't or don't want to work hard, telling the people that do to shut up because you're making us look bad. And that's exactly when black people tell other black students, stop acting white, they're basically saying, stop acting educated because now we're going to have to study too. That's it. And that's it. And so here we go. Why do we allow this? Well, because of the underdog armor. Who are we to say, right? Who are we to say? We don't understand the struggle, you see. That's why we can't comment on how absurd this is and how unspeakably racist it is and how evil it is. How evil it is to tell people you should not have to be able to succeed because of injustices that have been done to you in the past, and the fact that people are asking you to get the right answer is a sign of your oppression. You have just destroyed that person's ability to ever function in the world, except to be dependent on handouts from people who are keeping you perpetually angry. It's what I call the rage boiler. You have to have a lot of heat to keep the country in a state of rage, and you need the country in a state of rage, especially minorities, because that steam is going to drive the piston that's going to push people who are out of power into power, and people who don't have any influence into positions of influence. That will not happen unless they are running on a lot of steam pressure generated by the rage boiler. And the rage boiler must be kept at full pressure all the time. So if there's no genuine racism, we got to think of some new way now to make sure that everybody's constantly enraged. Hey, guess what? The national park system is racist. White people are keeping black people out of national parks. It's a disgrace. So the people of color get to get upset and filled with rage and hatred, and that's what they want. And the white people, those of them that are prone to abasing themselves, oh my God, we're worse than we thought. I have even more learning to do. I had no idea how racist I was. You had no idea how racist you were because you're not racist. Okay, this is an invented problem, as I pointed out. The number of people, the number of minorities going to national parks is actually slightly higher than the number of minorities living in the adjacent areas within easy travel distance. I bet if you were to take a look at the number of white people who visit downtown urban areas, you would find the exact inverse relationship, that white people are grossly underrepresented in the heart of American cities. So now you have to ask yourself, well, that's obviously true too, so what's the issue? Well, the issue is national parks are wonderful places to be. Inner cities are the worst places to be. National parks are essentially just left alone. Inner cities are run by Democrats and have been for a century. There was a time when people in the country would want to come to a city to see the city, to visit the city, because there was all kinds of interesting things and good things going on in a city, and they felt they could go to the city without having be a chance to lose their life. And this other woman on this thing about the national parks, this ABC News thing, a different person, different black woman, was saying, historically, being taken out into the woods has been very, very bad for black people because of, the things that were done to them out there. And I'm thinking, to you, to your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-great-great, hello? How far back? And she says, and so that's why we don't feel comfortable. We don't feel safe in the national parks, she said. And I heard that, and I said to myself, why don't you and I bet each other $10,000? And the bet is this. Let's see who is in greater danger a black woman walking down a trail in a national park for an hour in an afternoon on a Sunday, or a white person walking through the heart of downtown South Central Los Angeles for an hour at 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday? Which person is in more danger? So, there's your answer. And no one has got the guts to talk about these things, but we do, because we have membership, and as nobody can fire us. And it's great. It's great. It's great to talk about these things, because when you talk about things like when I talk with Zoe about these things, it's like we're both willing to admit and accept that there are things that are problems, and there are things that we don't see. But when you take a look at the thing on balance, everything's actually pretty good. Zoe pointed out, and it didn't escape my attention either, that a couple people in the comment section referring to that Air Force major basically said, I wonder if they would have let you fly in the top jets if you had applied in China, or France, or Germany, or England, or South America. If you walked into any one of these air forces with your obvious skills, because he's obviously an extremely bright guy, if you were to walk into any of those air forces and try to attempt to fly the very best, highest quality, rarest, most selected billet, how would you have done there? And I don't think that they would have gotten as far as this major did, who was driven, didn't have to leave, who was driven out of the Air Force as an F-22 pilot because of the systemic racism in the Air Force. And I'll just wrap this up by saying that one of the absolute best parts of this job, in fact, on balance, one of the best. Certainly one of the best. I was trying to say if it was the best, but actually the notes I get are probably the best part of this job. But I have been Guantanamo Bay twice, intentionally. I've been on a destroyer, and I've been on a submarine. One other example. I've seen a lot of actual documentaries there too. And in all of those cases, I was watching specifically for this exact thing. And as I said on the show with Zoe today, I understand that as a distinguished visitor CENTCOM as well, of course. But I'm talking about where I'm talking about like CENTCOM, the command center CENTCOM is it's pretty much exclusively officers there. I'm talking about regular enlisted people. And I understand that when there are visitors on board, you don't behave the way you would if there weren't visitors on board, in the same way that you behave differently in your house when you have guests than you do when you don't have guests. You might put pants on, for example, if you had people over. I'm watching the ratings, not the TV ratings, the enlisted naval personnel and so on. I'm watching the reaction and the interaction between enlisted men. And I'm not watching how they're dealing with us. I'm looking down the hall to see how they're dealing with each other when they don't think I'm watching. And I spent a lot of time looking at this, a lot of time. And I didn't see anything that didn't indicate to me that these people were shipmates. I did, to some degree, see people spending time in messes where you would find maybe a couple of black guys or a couple of white guys or a couple of women kind of grouping together. But again, if there's no coercion, then there's no oppression. That's a choice. Probably because they have similar culture backgrounds, a little easier to talk to people. But when I saw them on the job, when I saw them doing what they're supposed to be doing, I didn't see any of it. And I didn't hear any of it. And I heard precisely the opposite. And even a number of my assumptions were challenged by that. I saw, as I've said on this destroyer on USS Spruance, which was a delightfully lucky for me to be on that particular Aegis class destroyer because of Ray Spruance. I'm a big fan of his. But I remember seeing the damage control officer was a woman who was probably 5 foot tall, and I think she might have been 16, 17. That's how old she looked. She was this big. She didn't weigh 100 pounds soaking wet. And she was in charge of damage control for the entire ship. And I thought, okay. And then I spoke to her for 15 minutes, and I thought, this woman is going to keep this ship afloat one way or another, by God. She's going to do it because she's good at what she does, and the people she works with understand that. And so I guess this is kind of the point of this whole rant, is that I think this is it. I think it's naive and unfair to say that there are not some injustices left in this country. But what I absolutely 100% take issue with is the idea that this country is dealing with it not only below average, but that we're the worst in the world at dealing with it. When we are by far the best in the world at dealing with it. No one else on the planet is dealing with this at all. At all. I remember listening to people talking about how racist Americans were, and then when Barack Obama was elected President of the United States of America, I started looking around and saying, what is the highest political office ever held by a black person in Great Britain? Mayor, maybe, of some city? Who knows? Who knows? I don't see a lot of black personnel in Japan. Now, people can say, well, that's because there's not a lot of black people in Japan. And now we're kind of down to the, yes, it's very easy to talk about how racist America is because America has to deal with large percentages of the population that come from very different backgrounds. If you live in Japan and everybody around you is Japanese, you don't have a whole lot of racism issues to deal with. And nevertheless, the racism is there because if you live in Japan and you're a Korean, you are dirt. And so this is the thing, is that it's this constant comparison to an imaginary standard of perfection and never a comparison to the real world. Ever a comparison to the real world, which is why so many people basically said, well, if it's so awful here, why don't you go someplace else? This is my argument all the time when I hear people like this activist, this immigrant who is saying, I don't feel safe on America's national parks. Why don't you move to someplace where you do feel safe? That would be the attitude of a person who is really kind of like on some level, I'm not going to change, but we have changed and we've done all the changing we can. We continue to change. When somebody says, I can't stand it here, it's awful, I want to say, well, go someplace else. And they don't. Why? 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 Why don't they go someplace else? Why? This is the question. Why don't they go someplace else? I have given thought about going someplace else as things continue to get worse and worse here. I'm not going to do it. I can't bear the thought of it. I'm staying here. This is my country. I'm going to get it back. But if there was a country out there that was more American than America, there was a country out there that was freer than this country, had the same ideals, executing them better, I know. America's an idea. And if there was a geographical location that more conformed to that beautiful idea, that's where I'm going. I would vote with my feet and I would go. Yeah, David Booty's got it. America summed up in 6 words. Our worst critics refuse to leave. Why don't you go someplace else? You hear James Cameron, I remember, after Avatar, for 2 years, he was bleating about how noble the people in the Amazon were and how horrible civilization is and unbearable. And I thought to myself, well, Jim, you've got billions of dollars. You can move here and live with these wonderful people. you can come and live with them. You can afford that. So why don't you do that? Well, he doesn't do it because he's lying. And when you see genuine, now I'm talking about like tribes in Brazil and New Guinea, when you see people who have had zero contact with the outside world or very, very, very little, they're wearing banana skins. When you look at these tribal people that live right on the fringe of interacting with the rest of the world, what you find is all of these natives who used to be wearing banana skins are now wearing cloth shorts and t-shirts. And the reason that they're wearing cloth shirts and t-shirts is because cloth shirts and t-shirts are more comfortable than banana skins to wear, or whatever the alternative is. They're voting with their feet too. They're wearing more comfortable clothes. If somebody dropped more comfortable clothes out of the sky, I'd wear them. And so this whole thing is just one giant ego stroke. It's all one enormous continuation of this white man's burden crap. James Cameron is going to save these poor, poor children in the Amazon from us real people, because if James Cameron doesn't do it, then who will? They could never take care of themselves. That article about the hiking trail said that white people should be out there trying to help mentor people of color when they get out to parks. Well, that's not condescending at all. If I took a group of people from Barrio here in East LA and I drove them out to Joshua Tree National Park, and we get out, what am I supposed to do with these Mexicans who are either here as legal people or not? What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to take them out and say, okay, now before we get out of the bus, nobody panic, okay? That giant ball of fire in the sky is not a god, and it's not angry, it's not going to come to us. It's just part of the things, and these things here on the ground are rocks. Don't eat those. What am I supposed to tell them? Racism, racism, racism. It's all on the left. It's all on the left. Let's do some questions. Oh, there. And I saw our friend, well, my friend anyway. It's not a close friend by any means, but I will genuinely. There are some people out there. You've heard the expression. Not so much lately. You say, I am forever in your debt. Glenn Reynolds is a person, Instapundit. That is a guy who I am forever in his debt. He's told me many times, hey, my website works because I link to good material and you put out good material. I said, thank you. But without Instapundit, I wouldn't be here. And those Instalanches not just get me views and recognition and stuff, they also gave me an enormous shot in the arm. And he was on TV recently talking about this whole thing about the woke mob basically changing the world, 2-3% of the population changing the rest of it to match their neurotic insanity. And I just listened to him and thought, Glenn, you really got it. There's no oppression without coercion. He didn't say that, I did. All right, let's see what we got here. Oh, it's because I haven't refreshed the page. Let's have a looky look, shall we? Okay, we're going to do Facebook, and then we'll go back to a members page next time. First 4 questions are from Eric M. Blake. Let's see. The next 4 are from Steve Young. Next 2 from Susan Speakman. And 2 more from Eric. 1 from Jim Samples, 1 from Martin Archer. Joe Pomeroy, Andrew. Okay, so I get the idea. So I do love you, Eric. Honest to God, I do. Your enthusiasm, Eric, is just, it blows me away. It just makes me happy every time I see it. I don't know if I can do all of those. I'm going to try and do one from everybody if I can, or for the next half hour, or whatever. Let's see. Is Andrew Clavin, is he a queer? Well, he does look like a queer. He does look like a queer. And he talks like a queer. He does talk like a queer. And he's on television. No, I don't think Andrew Clavin is a queer. By the way, since the 2 weeks we didn't shoot the show last week, and 2 weeks ago I played some Harry Enfield and then Harry and Paul, and I've watched pretty much nothing since then. But I didn't know this before 3-4 weeks ago. Paul Whitehouse is one of the 3 most brilliantly funny people who ever live. And Johnny Depp apparently said, Johnny Depp spent a lot of time living in England. Johnny Depp apparently said that Paul Whitehouse is the best actor in the world. Yeah. So for those of you watching on YouTube at home, 2 weeks ago we did. I just thought it was one of the funniest sketches I've ever seen. It's just search for Harry Enfield Quare, Quare. It's two British guys in a club looking at newspaper articles and trying to decide if they're queers or not. It's just pricelessly good. It's so good. And there's a gay man in the back of the club named Bunny. And they're just... We should ask Bunny. Bunny's a queer. Bunny, you're a queer, aren't you? Oh, yes, I'm a frightful queer. It's fabulous. And this is one of the things that got me so down earlier this week. It just, not depressed or even despairing, just sad that you saw again and again and again. No, you could never do that today. You could never have that joke today. It's not a hateful joke. It's making fun of the whole thing. One of my favorite ones of those, because they did about 6 or 7 of these same sketches, same theme. One of them, I forget who the guy was. It's like, oh, is he a queer? Yes, he looks like a queer. Oh, and he sounds like a queer, and all of this, all these reasons. And so on. He says, he is, however, a very good shot, and that would militate somewhat him being a queer. And then the other guy's like, goes into vapor lock. You know, he looks like a queer. He sounds like a queer, but he's a very good shot. Oh, I'm terribly confused. Marvelous. All right, here we go. Oh, Steve Young, bless you. Steve Young just posted a meme on the Facebook page, and it's a kid smiling, and he said, "My teacher just said guns kill people. I told her my pencil failed my last exam." Classic. All right. All right, here we go. Eric Blake. I had to pick one. Hey, Bill, I've been mulling over this since you started talking about the Wellerman. Considering how the phenomenon burst out of TikTok, I can't help thinking about what Trump thought and said and tried to do about TikTok. Was he right to be suspicious of it? Why or why not? P.S. Imagine those folks involved in doing the song, doing a version of the theme of a Moby Dick miniseries on HBO or Max or whatever. Trump's criticism of TikTok is completely independent of the content on TikTok. Trump's criticism of TikTok is based on the fact that TikTok is essentially owned by the Chinese Communist Party, and much more importantly, is essentially just bleeding data. And Zoom is the same way. Anybody who signs up on TikTok is essentially registering in a communist Chinese database, and so are all their friends and all of those other connections. And by the way, we concentrate a lot on what Google is doing to eavesdrop and connect dots and all this other stuff, predict behaviors and so on. They're not the only ones. The problem with TikTok and Zoom is that they are both, it's not that they're foreign owned, It's that they're foreign-owned spy mechanisms. When you look at the architecture of the program, you find out that they're designed to leak data. That's their job. That's what they do. And if you're using TikTok, then you are not only sharing with the Communist Party what you put on your TikTok page, you are almost certainly sharing with them everything that your phone is seeing and hearing. Almost certainly. Without question, you're sharing everything that you see and hear that you actually record on the phone. And many, many years ago, I was not surprised, although I was somewhat alarmed to hear from people who are in the intelligence business who say, yeah, no problem. I can just turn on your iPhone right now from a remote location. I just turn it on. And I can record, I can hear everything you say, and I can see whatever the camera can see. And you'll never know that I turned it on. The light doesn't come on, nothing. I just decided to turn it on. And so when you have business meetings that are being conducted on Zoom, 99% of that stuff, or 99.9% of that stuff, or higher, is utterly useless. But the 1% of it is not useless, and it is simply given to them. There's no security. It is open source spyware that you install and use enthusiastically. Now, I will go off base here a little bit because that's what we do on this show. One of the things that I just hit a perfect storm of. I can't be clear enough about this because I don't want it to sound like it was despair, like, oh my God. It's just plain shock and disbelief and sadness. But if you want to really, really have a look at where things are today in this culture on the bleeding edge, you should go to YouTube and look at TikTok cringe compilations. And there are 120 or 180 of them or something. 25, 30 minutes of 4 or 5 second clips of people on TikTok. Now, they call it a cringe compilation because these are the worst at TikTok, and with 8 billion people on the planet, you're going to see some pretty scary stuff. But I have to tell you, when you watch a TikTok cringe compilation, you are, if you have any kind of a moral structure, biblical structure, anything, you look at some of these things and you say, my God, the pillar of fire is on its way. The pillar of fire is on its way. Yeah. Ice Pick asked if I'm going to get to the members' questions I didn't get to last lunch. I'm not going to get to them tonight. I will get to them next time. I know that sounds a little bizarre. I did members' questions 3 weeks in a row before that. Got through most of them, I think. And Stratosphere Lounge has been a Facebook thing going back forever. So I try to get the member questions knocked down. But tonight we're just going to do Facebook because that's kind of how we started with that. But I will get to them next week. So that's, I think, what Trump was talking about with TikTok. Okay, Martin Archer, I will read your question. I will read it next. Martin Archer wants to know, hey, Bill, at some point in the colonies, which is that science fiction thing I've been talking about, you're going to need a bad guy or guys. Have you something in mind? Do they bear resemblance to the specific bad guy from some existing work of sci-fi or other movie for that matter? A good bad guy with some memorable lines and actions would work wonders for the show. And please read my email. Thanks, Bill. I did read your email, Martin. I'm sorry I haven't answered you. The situation has just been... I haven't read much email lately for the last couple of days. Just the dude abides at this point. Yeah, I did mention this at one point. I wanted to do this show with no magic, and I had to go to the very edges of magic, but without breaking any physical rules with the whole connected Stargate thing, but we're not seeing any signs of intelligent life out there. And I think that when you give the total number of stars in the galaxy and the number of stars in all of the galaxies, then obviously there's other intelligent life out there, technologically capable. That's the word. Technologically capable means you can use radios to communicate, you can fly in space. But I think they are exceedingly, exceedingly rare. I would be astonished if there was an intelligent species, technological species within 100 light years. I'd be astonished if there was one within 1,000 light years. And if there were more than 10 in the entire Milky Way galaxy, I'd be quite surprised. Now, 30, 40 years ago, I would have thought there would be millions of them, but it's just not happening. And the reason, I'm getting to the good guy, bad guy thing. As I get more and more into this, I realize the flukiness of life on Earth, of intelligent life on Earth, the unlikelihood of technological life on this planet is not based on what we always thought it was. It is not based on how close to the sun we are at all. There are millions of relatively Earth-like planets that could support life out there. The reason there's intelligent life here is because of the moon. And it's because of the moon in so many ways. The obvious way is that the moon blocks or knocks out of contention huge numbers of asteroid impacts that basically reset the intelligence clock. If you have 20, 30 million years, 50 million years of evolution, and creatures start getting more and more intelligent, and then every 30, 40, 50 million years, you reset the clock because some asteroid impact carries away all of the top level life forms and just leaves the microbes or burrowing animals. Okay, well, without the moon, that clock wouldn't be reset every 2, 3, 4, 500 million years or 70 or whatever. It would be reset every few 100,000 years. But the main thing is, there's just so much about it that's not seen. Without the presence of the moon, the Earth's axial tilt would wobble, and we'd find ourselves for hundreds of thousands of years in the situation that Uranus is in today. The North Pole would be facing the sun, be spinning this way. It would be completely boiling hot for 6 months out of the year, and then frozen cold on the other 6. You just don't get life like that. If the axial tilt, this is the kind of thing when I talk about how subtle it is. Without the moon, you don't have tides. Without the tides, this transition from the sea to the land is virtually impossible. All of these analogies, these mud skipper things, and all of these ancestors happen because of tides. They happen because there's water, and then the water goes away. Then the water comes back, and the water goes away. You can't just have a creature just decide to hop up on the land. It just doesn't work that way. You have to have an entire ecosystem that is both land and sea, depending on the time, and you can move back and forth, and that's the only way you can get it going. But if you can make the jump to land, then you have to start looking at the problem of things like food preservation. If you have to live in the north, and you have to amass enough food to not only get you through the day, but to get you through half of the year, then that requires planning and forethought. And that doesn't happen if there's no seasons, and it doesn't happen if there's too much seasons. Axial tilt of the Earth is 26.5 degrees, if I remember correctly. If it was much less than that, you wouldn't need to be able to do that because the seasonal variations wouldn't be so big. A little bit colder, a little bit warmer, but it wouldn't be, we're not going to eat for 6 months. On the other hand, if it were considerably greater than 26 degrees, then most of the northern hemisphere would be uninhabitable, because now you're talking about deep freeze for 6, 7 months out of the year, and then really hot temperature. It's just, all of these things are all connected. And I think the idea of just looking at the moon, that's why Arthur C. Clarke called that first hominid in 2001 23.5. I knew that. I was going to actually question that, and I just realized, I thought it was 23. Now it's 26. Thanks. That first hominid in 2001, the one to use the first tool, is Arthur C. Clarke named him Moon Watcher. Guess what he did? He just looked at the moon. We take that for granted, but that's an object in the sky that you can look at. And that's it. And I'm utterly convinced, and you don't have to take my word for it. Archaeologists agree on this point. Anthropologists agree on this point. Mathematics was invented to predict solar eclipses. I've seen a solar eclipse, and when that solar eclipse was finished, the first thing I wanted to do was figure out when the next one's going to be. All of it together makes it extremely unlikely. So now to get to your question. I am not going to do an alien race for bad guys. I've never believed it. If you think about it, the United States military could probably defeat the rest of the world right now, but without question. You remember? Let me get off of that. Let me put it a little cleaner. It's a movie that came out in the early '80s called, was it The Final Countdown? Last Countdown? USS Nimitz, brand new at the time, goes back in time to just before World War II, and they're capable of preventing Pearl Harbor. So the Nimitz by itself with F-14 Tomcats is facing the Japanese Navy. And the question is, could the Nimitz have simply changed the course of the war? And the answer is, you better believe it could have changed the course of the war. The Nimitz with that radar and the F-14s and all that other stuff, yeah, they could have absolutely shot down every single plane on that Pearl Harbor raid, and then they could have taken their ordnance out there, and they could have just used standoff missiles to sunk the entire Japanese fleet, of course. So my point is, that movie was made in, let's say, for the sake of the math, 85, which is 40 years after World War II. So in a 40-year period, you've got enough of a technological distinction so that there's no fight whatsoever. There is no fight whatsoever. If you could take all of the United States Navy and move it into 1945, or if you prefer, if you wanted to bring all of Kido-Butai, the Japanese carrier force from 1941, November of 1941, you brought the Imperial Japanese Navy 3 months before the war started, and you brought them into the Pacific in the present, and you put the United States at war with Japan right now, and Japan had the World War II fleet at full strength, and we had our fleet. The Pacific War would be over in a day. And it would only take a day just because that's how long it would take for us to get to all the targets. So, if 40 years difference means there's no contest, then in order to have an adversary who can stand up to you, either not immediately crumble, like this question, or not completely just annihilate you in a stroke. So it's not going to be bad guys, aliens. So now what does that leave us? Because you have to have bad guys. The primary bad guys, I'm going to make the Chinese, and I'm going to make them the Chinese because the Chinese have earned it. They've earned it. I am going to. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 150 years, and that's not what science fiction is all about. Science fiction is not about my best guess of what's going to look like 150 years from now, 200 years from now. My job with science fiction, and what science fiction does, is to take today and to move it into a laboratory and play with it there. The Bridge of the Enterprise in the original Star Trek series is 1966 America. That's America 1966. Kirk having these girls walking around in miniskirts, and his Captain's Yeoman. It's 1966. So the reason I want to do it is I want to show an idealized America as it exists in my head, in your head as well. I want to show it. I want to just think about it. Don't want to talk about it. It's going to be utopian to that degree, but the first mistake that writers make is when they make everything so perfect, there's no drama anymore. That's the whole reason a Mary Sue is a Mary Sue. I'm in love with this character. I live through this character. I don't want this character to suffer setbacks, and so my character wins everything all the time easily. That's just a natural instinct that creates extremely lazy and bad writing. But I'm trying to deal with real world. That's why I dismissed the aliens thing. So I'm going to go with, yeah, CP Tom, Janice Rand. I spent a significant amount of my adolescence thinking about Janice Rand. So I think they've earned it. I think they've earned it the way that they dealt with this whole Wuhan thing. I think they developed that in a lab, and I think it got out because of their incompetence. I know for a fact that American scientists went over to their virology lab in Wuhan and said this place is not nearly sophisticated enough to have earned this level 4 rating that it's got. This lab is not competent enough to deal with the kind of pathogens that they're going to be working with. But they did it anyway. And what's beyond question is they sealed off their own country 6 weeks before they sealed off the rest of the world. That's intentional. That's China. I look back throughout history, and I'd be happy to have somebody point this out to me, but I am not aware of China ever having had allies in the past at any time. Now, the only allies I can think of for the Chinese were the Americans during World War II. And since I did a segment on the Doolittle raid, I know the price that the Chinese paid for having gotten those American airmen back to America. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese were murdered by the Japanese as a result of the Doolittle raids. Hundreds of thousands, maybe 500,000. And Doolittle and the rest of his pilots constantly remarked on the courage and the selflessness and the gratitude shown by those Chinese. And I thought, well, you got to factor that in. Bill, you can't just not deal with that. And I realized, if you look at history, those people were driven off of mainland China and onto Taiwan, Formosa at the time, by Mao. Those Chinese are Taiwanese today, and they're the same people they always were, great people. But Mao did it. And by the way, Mr. Tomes, I got that before you did. Before I saw your comment. Yeah, that's where they are. So Taiwan's going to be a real ally. But the communist Chinese are much more representative of Chinese history as it has existed for 5,000 years. It was always the Middle Kingdom surrounded by barbarians. They built a wall to keep everyone and everything else out. And I don't know of a case where China was allied. And I don't mean like a loose alliance. I mean fighting allies like America and the United States, or America and Australia in Vietnam, or fighting allies, French and the Americans in the Revolutionary War. I don't believe that they've ever had an ally. Now, Aesop says he thought that Russia was an ally of China. They were allied briefly for about, less than 10 years after World War II. They were both communist nations. Mao and Stalin absolutely detested each other, and that so-called alliance broke down so fast that by the time we got to the 70s, the Russians and the Chinese were trying to get the Americans to counter with them to fight the other one. So certainly Russia has had alliances throughout its past. They were allied with France during the Napoleonic Wars and so on and so on. But China never. It's not in their nature. And that is how I'm going to play it. Did some thinking along these lines. Martin says it's a long digression from your question. Well, Martin, I'm terribly sorry if I'm taking too long to answer your question. I really am. I'm trying to answer your question. So if it's I can just speed it up or just chop it off if you'd like. I'm trying to deal with the answer to your question. Who are the bad guys going to be? And I'm trying to explain that they're being the bad guys because this is why they're the bad guys. They are going to be, in the backstory, the first nation state to set up a closed system, to set up their own gate route to their own systems that are not open to other people. That's going to happen in this backstory, and when that happens, everybody else has to do it. So that is going to be the primary adversary. But there's room for a much more there's room for a much more interesting set of enemies and adversaries, and they also have to make sense. So they're going to be human, and I see the future as basically splitting off into three different paths. There are the regular people like you and me. There are a group of humans who decide to enhance themselves cybernetically, and then there's another group of humans that decide to enhance themselves genetically. And when you see what the cyber enhancement, pretty done to death already. That's kind of the whole cyberpunk thing. But dealing with humans who are willing to modify their own genes to make life easier for them in space, that can produce some fan-frickin-tastic alien creatures that happen to be human. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke again who said, if you're going to live in a weightless environment, legs are just a problem. These legs of ours are significant percent of our body mass. I don't know what it's like, 30, 40%, something like that. They get in the way and they bang around things. Be better to have another set of arms down there. So if you could, and you can, if you were to deal with an alien race that spent its entire time in 0G and they could genetically alter themselves so that they've got 4 sets of arms instead of 2 arms and 2 of these big useless legs, okay. And maybe they don't need noses because they are dealing with chemically purified or filtered air and make whatever changes they want to themselves, and they become monsters. That's cool. You can't have you can't just have adversaries be wearing different uniforms or a different alien suit either. It can't just be, for instance, take Star Trek. In Star Trek, you could ask who are the bad guys in Star Trek. Well, they're the Klingons and the Romulans. Fair enough. But most of the bad guys were guys like the guy who was running the prison with Garth of Ivar, and then there was the Squire of Gothos was a bad guy, and the rock monster that set up this conflict between Abraham Lincoln and the bad guys. He was a villain, and Charlie X was a villain, and the people that put Charlie X there and took him back are villains, and the guys from the Andromeda Galaxy are villains, and the people that move fast in time are the villains, and none of them are Klingons or Romulans. So you've got kind of two different classes of bad guys. You've got kind of institutional adversaries who are adversarial as a group, and then you have individuals who are on your team, or at the very least in your uniform. And so the outside threat, the main external threat, is going to be the Chinese. The internal threat is going to be bureaucrats, and it's going to be the kind of people that are trying to do things like change the military right now. It's going to be social engineers, and it's going to be mostly going to be the Karens. I know that sounds, I never really put it quite so plainly, but that's really what it's going to be. The reason they're going to fight for their independence is they're fighting for independence from Karen. Honestly, that's really what it comes down to. They're fighting, and they're leaving Earth, and they're going out to the frontier because they're tired of being continuously told what to do by busybody idiots who can't do anything other than tell other people what to do. The frontier story, the story of the pioneers. I've got to think of a reason why this young man is going to take his family off of Earth and go to the middle of nowhere, a ball of rock in another solar system, and be living in a camper, basically in a rover. You might as well be living in a Winnebago. You take your whole family, all 4 of you, and go live in a Winnebago on the far side of the moon. What would force you to do that? And the answer would be space Karens. This guy is going to be like, we have to do something. Okay, well, in order to do that, you're going to have to go over here and get this permit. So he goes and stands in line for that permit. But when he does that, he finds out that, no, you can't be in this line because you didn't get this thing done first, so you got to go stand over there, and so on and so on and so on, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, constantly being monitored, constantly being told what to do. He's going to discipline his daughter. He's not going to strike her, forget even spank her. She's in 16, 17. But he's going to basically tell her, you cannot go out to these clubs because you nearly got murdered the other night. And censors are going to pick that up, or neighbors, and they're going to have Child Protective Services of the future, Space Child Protective Services, show up and ask him, what gives him the right to speak so harshly to his daughter, that kind of thing. And it's just going to reach the point and says, you know what, I've had it. I'm done. I'm done with it. Absolutely done with it. He's just going to go. And Aesop brings up a nice point. It says the new Lost in Space is completely woke, weak males and all female leads. The thing about the Pioneer story that I like, the Pioneer storyline, is it is the clearest example of showing the traditional male-female family roles and how well they work. This guy, Frontier Dad, is going to be a young guy, and he's going to essentially be like a roughneck, like a oil worker on a derrick, except he's not drilling for oil. He's essentially a hydraulic engineer. He's or that's not the word. He's basically drilling for water. He's looking for ice and drilling through water. That's his job. He's a water oil worker. He drills for water instead of oil. And so he's got to know some engineering, and he's a wildcatter. He's doing it on his own. He's got his own little rig, and he goes out there and drills, and he basically drills and finds ice and turns it into water and sells the water. Hydrologist. Sure, there you go. Thank you, Dave. That's what he does. And so he's got to have enough of a brain to be able to figure out where the water is, but he doesn't have a crew of guys that he can send off while he retires to the gold-plated toilet. He has to also go out there and drill and dig and fix things and have things break down, all that stuff. So he's got to be physically strong. That's important. He's got to be physically strong. And then the person who marries him has to be the kind of person that is willing to give up all the social connections and go live on a rock in the middle of nowhere. And they do that for each other. This is not exactly her dream in terms of where she'd like to live, but this wife has to be, she's got to have grit, and she has to be above, I almost said beyond, but above is better. The wife has to be above the need for petty social interaction. Not for social interaction. I think women need that much more than men do as a general rule. But petty stuff. She doesn't want silliness. She doesn't have patience for it. And being in the company of a good man who pays attention to her, listens to her, and respects her opinion is much more important to her than being surrounded by a bunch of giggling idiots. And she wants her family to be taken away from this poison that will kill them. She wants her children to not grow up in the sewer. Better that they grow up out in the middle of nowhere than in the sewer. And it really is a family. You know, everybody talks, everybody. I grew up watching Lost in Space, and I thought, oh, wow, okay, great. When you think about it, yes, Wizard, Wizard or Wizard, Love, Death, and Robots had an episode like that. Hey, congratulations, sir. I didn't make the reference because I don't know how many people have seen it, but you win the internet for the day. That's exactly, precisely what I'm going to do, and I'm going to just steal it. I'm just going to steal it. When I saw that, it put it in perfect what I wanted. So what the hell am I talking about? There's a series on Netflix called Love, Death, and Robots. And I want to say it was either 8 or 12, 10, something like that. 10 different episodes, each of them about 12 minutes long or so. And they're all completely different. Every single one of them is a one-off. They're all computer animation. All of it is computer animation. There are a couple things that have live action, but virtually all of it is computer animation. And of the 12 stories, 2 or 3 of them are excellent. 4 of them, excellent. Another 4 are very, very good. 2 more are good, and then 2 of them are mediocre. Something like that. The ones that I like, and these are now 4 years old, The ones that I like are the ones that have very, very photorealistic CGI. There's one called Beyond the Akila Drift, I want to say. These are all short stories about a crew that basically misjumps and ends up out there. And I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but things get weirder and weirder, and they find out they're not where they think they are. That's incredible. Great, great story. Shocking story. Really kind of like Hitch in the Gut story. There's a story about a woman who basically fights in an arena by jacking her mind into this kind of almost like this super dinosaur, and she fights other creatures in the arena. That's not one of my four favorites, but it's good. There's an incredible one about Russian soldiers in World War II fighting packs of aliens. It's just the Red Army facing packs of aliens, and that is just fantastic. Just fantastic. But the two I like the most, I think one of them is called Lucky 13, and it's about a black woman pilot, dropship pilot, on a dropship that was number 13, and it was known to be unlucky, but she took it anyway, and she and this dropship keep surviving. They just get through. And you kind of get the sense that this actual dropship actually has a soul. And that is very, very photorealistic. It's just great science fiction. It's a great story. You've heard me constantly complaining about female warriors. This woman pilot, this black woman pilot in this Lucky 13 thing on Love, Death and Robots is wonderful. I would serve with or under that person anytime with a great deal of pride and honor. But the one that we're talking about here, that rang that bell for me, is I don't remember the name of it, but it's actually it's done with CG, but it doesn't look like CG. It looks like a cartoon, looks like a hand-drawn cartoon, and basically it is about a series of homestead families that are out on this rock, and it is America. I mean, it is America. And outside of this protective bubble are these aliens, and these aliens start coming through. And so these three farmers have to get into their mech machines, like mech warrior machines, like just honest to God, these huge mechanized warriors, which they built themselves on their own farms, and fight these things off. And this guy, the protagonist of this, is just this huge man. You know, he's not bulked up or muscled up. He's just a big guy. Big, strong guy, and his wife is petite and so on. And when these things start coming in, he goes off to fight these things. And the wife is, the dynamic is perfect. He's not a warrior, he's not a big hero, but somebody's got to go out and protect his family from these creatures. So he gets into this it's not powered armor, it's a walking mech. It's a battle mech. And they go out and fight these things, and meanwhile she's rounding up other people and all the rest of it. Yeah, like Haas, exactly, Dave Big Booty. He's exactly like Haas. It's a little smarter than Haas, but pretty much the same thing. He's just a good man, and all of the people there are good people, and they're watching out for each other. And then they just kind of do this pullback, and you realize that this whole thing's taking place on this dome among hundreds of other domes on this rock in the middle of nowhere. It's wonderful. And when I saw it, that's why I got so lit up. Just went ding when you mentioned it. Wizard 13. When you mentioned it. It just rang a bell, because that was what put the final spike into this kind of, vague idea I had. I knew I wanted to do something like that, and I didn't know exactly how to do it. Then I saw that, and I thought, man, that is spot on. That's exactly what I want. So it's just good family. But back to what I was saying earlier, when you start, I watched so much Lost in Space. Vizard? Thank you, Vizard. It's German. Vizard 13. Well, thank you. It's wonderful. Good to see you, by the way. New name. I grew up watching Lost in Space, and I thought, man, this is going to be awesome. How awesome would it be? How awesome would it be to live on the Jupiter 2 and be on this planet and be? I wanted to be Will Robinson. Let me tell you. Did I tell you guys the Billy Mooney story? No, I'll make it very brief. When I was watching Lost in Space as a kid, I was living in Bermuda. My dad was the manager of the hotel there. And it was the nicest resort on the island at the time, and Bermuda was the place to go. It was kind of the Cancun and stuff. And basically, I remember saying, Dad, why don't we just send an invitation to Billy Mooney, come to the hotel, and we can hang out together. I can hang out with Will Robinson, we can talk. All right, so that's all you hear about that. Anyway, I thought, how great would that be? Get to ride around in the chariot and have lasers and shoot lasers and stuff and be independent and all that jazz. And it was only much, 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 much later when I realized you're talking now about you're stuck with your family in a large mobile home forever. And then it started to think, I don't know. Could you handle it? There are, without question, it does not just apply specifically. By no means does it apply specifically to Mormons. But my experience with Mormons has been, with the Mormons that I've gotten to know well enough and spent several days at their house, is that these Mormon families are so happy and comfortable with each other. When I went to, I think the first public speaking event I ever did was in Southern Utah University, and some guys from some students at Brigham Young took me around Salt Lake at night, and they pointed out the one liquor store in the town, and I said, well, what do you guys do, with your time? Oh, we spend a lot of time outdoors and stuff. And he said, doesn't it get cold up here? Yeah, but we really like it. So we do a lot of camping and stuff, all this. Yeah, and we don't, we don't really party the way they do in other schools and stuff. What do you do with your free time? Mostly we just go out with my family, go hiking together, and we go up in the hills, we go camping, and sometimes we'll just take a road trip, the family. I said, how many of you? He said, 7 of us. And then he said, they're my best friends. And I thought, wow, no wonder these people have got it together. This young man was 19. He had $200,000 in the bank. He had a year's worth of food in the basement of his house, which he was paying off that he was about to own. He'd already done a year's missionary work across the world, more of an adult than I will ever be. But he said, yeah, we believe we get married forever. Like you say, I'm not saying this is exclusively Mormon, but this is where I've seen it so notably, because I don't know many Mormons, and virtually all of them were in this way. And this guy said, yeah, we feel like when you get married, you're married for all eternity, and so you better marry somebody you like. And so I did, and that's what we do. And then I realized that this is where the actual story is. The story is not, I'm going to use this for shorthand. Again, I don't want to lock anybody out of this. I'm just going to use it for shorthand, so there you go. The story is not about like a Mormon Swiss Family Robinson. It's not about, I'm going to get rid of that word. The story is not about watching a strong family out there on the frontier. The story is watching the 2 kids, especially the 17-year-old daughter, who wanted nothing to do with this, being essentially kidnapped by her family and put into that environment. The story is watching her slowly change and begin to appreciate the benefits of it. I've been thinking about this almost nonstop. She is from a city on Earth. And she has to leave all of her friends at 16, 17. That's the end of the world. And not just leave them. She can't talk to them. She can send them emails, but take, weeks to get a message back and forth. And they're not just going to a different city. They're going to the middle of nowhere. And now she's going to have to, this girl is just as she's at that age where she wants to launch and meet all these boys and have all this fun and stuff. Nope, they're just being taken away and sent on a rock. And it's just going to be her little brother who drives her crazy, her dad and her mom. Her dad and her mom love her. They've taken care of her. It's not like it's a bad family, but this is not her choice or her decision. And she is filled with anger and rage and bitterness. And this goes on for episodes and episodes and episodes. And it's only towards the end of the first season that you begin to see cracks in that resentment. Once it's clear after 7 or 8 episodes that she can't just throw enough of a tantrum to undo this, then something has to surprise her by the way it interests her. I'm kind of inclined to want to say geology, that she may see something particularly beautiful in terms of crystals and may just develop an interest in that. And the other thing I've been thinking about from the beginning, I've been thinking about this for 10 years, is this family and all of these colonists on the frontier story. I don't know why this is so important to me. They have to make their own music. They have to play their own instruments. I just feel that in my bones. I also saw that in a house, it was a Mormon house, one of the ones I was talking about, and they didn't have a TV, and so, look, I didn't want to watch. I don't watch TV hardly ever. Just catch up now on like the Expanse and Vikings, but I really don't watch much TV at all. So that wasn't what surprised me. They didn't have much internet either, and I said, "What do you guys do with your evenings?" They said, "Well, we have dinner and then we pretty much play music." I said, "What kind of stuff do you like to listen to?" He said, "No, we play music." And the next thing I know, it's an hour later, and here's a family of 7 kids, and they bring out cellos and violins. There's a piano, and they just start playing this music, and they play with each other frequently, and they're good. But that's what it is, and that's what we're missing. I was one of these things where it's like you're surprised, but you're not shocked. When I saw a study that said that the number one correlator of people who don't get in, the number one correlator of males in prison, the number one thing not that they have in common, it's not race, it's not background, it's not religion, it's not economic background. It's fatherless boys. That's 93% or something of the prison population. It correlates all across all different age groups, spectrums, economic classes, no fathers. But one of the things that they found that hold families together in terms of stress, suicides, drug use, all of it, is that families that have dinner together have virtually no what used to be called juvenile delinquency. Virtually none. Certainly none serious. Families where mom and dad and the kids sit down and have dinner every day have essentially none of those pathologies. And it's, am I going to introduce firearms? You bet I'm going to introduce firearms. Dad's going to start training these kids to shoot at 3, 4, because there's going to be a point when it's got to be Will Robinson's going to have to... The very first season of Lost in Space, very different than the other two. The other two were ridiculous and absurd and campy because Batman came along in between season 1 and 2 of Lost in Space, and they decided, let's get on the camp bandwagon. But the first season of Lost in Space is actually pretty good science fiction. It's not the Dr. Smith show, and early on they're in this rover up there as the Chariot, and John Robinson gets kidnapped by this one-eyed giant, and he's going to be mincemeat except for Will Robinson. 8 or 9-year-old boy goes climbing up this mountain, pulls out his laser pistol, and fires at this thing. And I thought, yeah, man, you better believe it. Yes, of course they're going to have weapons. And they're going to have lots of drones and that kind of thing, too. I'm really interested in working that in, and robots, real robots. But anyway, so this kid is going to love it. The young boy is going to love it because he's going to get to play with stuff. And he's going to get to drive the rover when he's 10. And the reason he's going to get to drive the rover when he's 10 is because there's a significant chance that Dad is going to be out there one day with a broken leg, and no one will be able to come and get him except for this 10-year-old boy. And if this 10-year-old boy can't drive this truck, then they're dead. And so that alone is going to be grand. And it's going to be great to see this. This is not my strong suit. I haven't got a lot of experience writing this kind of stuff, but I'm convinced that the way you win people over in this particular stripe of this particular show, the way you win them over is not by showing them the benefits of frontier life, the way so many people have pointed out in the comment section, pointed out Little House on the Prairie, which is astonishingly popular, by the way, unbelievably popular, and so is The Waltons. But for today's audience, you can't just say, hey, look how happy they are, because you can't get from here to there. What you have to do is you have to have this teenage girl be the character that the audience identifies with. In other words, when they first end up and she realizes, I'm 16, I have to be here till I'm 18, then I'm out of here. But between now and then, I have to spend 2 years with mom and dad and my jerk little brother in a mobile home, and there's nothing I can do about it. And watching her disgust and rage and anger and isolation and despair and depression, all of that has got to be in there so that people watching today can say, that's exactly how I would behave if they moved me out to the middle of the frontier someplace, and I had to you got to give them something to identify with. And then slowly, you introduce something that just kind of nibbles around the edges of her interest. And then as it begins to develop, she starts to see qualities to this life that she didn't see before. And over time, we realize that these things are actually much, much more important. They're more satisfying. They bring more happiness. I've been thinking about this character and this relationship with her dad nonstop for the last week. I remember thinking, okay, so the next nearest neighbor is 40, 50 miles away. And I remember thinking playing with things now as a writer, thinking like, okay, so let's say that there's a neighbor that's 120 miles away, and it's a young man. What's the chance of the young man being 16? It's about 0. He'd either be younger or older. Let's make him older. How much older? How much of a difference can I have without it being skeevy? Let's say the guy's 22. Now dad has to decide whether or not he wants his daughter to go out and go on a date with this 22-year-old guy. And on one hand, he's thinking, no, that's too old. And on the other hand, he's looking around and he's saying, on the other hand, he is literally the last man on earth, or at least on this quarter of it. So you have to deal with all of these issues, about dad and stuff. And then she wants to drive like the smaller Rover, not the mobile house. She wants to drive this pressurized thing from here to there. And he's got to decide whether he's going to let her do it. And he decides that he's going to let her do it. He's a good enough father to find a balance between this need to protect her and at the same time give her enough freedom so she doesn't rebel and go nuts. I'll see you later there, Chief. And this is interesting. It's interesting. What do you do? Your daughter says, I'd really like to go and spend some time with Jimmy Williams. Well, what do we know about Jimmy Williams? Well, I know his dad. I don't know his dad, but I know a guy who knows his dad. They seem like good people, and blah, blah, blah. And they've invited me over, and I can't just go for an hour because it's going to take a day to get there, and so on and so forth. And here, let's talk to his dad. He talks to the dad, and it turns out the dad's here, and he's going to have a separate room and all this other stuff. Everything kind of, okay, this seems reasonable. All right, maybe we could do this. Okay. I want to meet the boy first. All of this stuff. But comes a point when dad's going to have to decide whether or not he's going to give his little girl the keys to the car to drive across a foreign planet with a deadly exterior. Air is too thin to breathe, and it's 80 or 90 degrees below zero. And she doesn't want to go with the chaperone. And she doesn't. If mom and dad go, she's not going. So he has to decide whether or not to let her go. And he says, I'll let you go under 2 conditions. One of them is you have to give us updates every hour on the road. Okay, she agrees to that. And the other one is, I'm looking for something. She says the other one is, he says you have to take Quaz with you. Give me a second here. And she doesn't have a problem with that because Quaz is their robot. And just give you an idea of what I'm looking at here, because when I say robot, it's important you see what I'm talking about. I can get this picture for you in no time. Dad lets the little boy go, wandering around out there as long as he's got Quaz with him. So let me show you Quaz. Uh, almost there. Almost there. Stand by. Everybody hold your horses. Worth the wait, believe me. This is a fantastic asset. This is one of the best 3D models I've ever seen in my life. And I will find it here, so help me God. I'm sorry for the dead air. I hate the dead air, but there's sometimes you just can't do anything about it. It's just there. Where did it go? Here he is. This is the family robot. He's a member of the family. Yeah, that'll do it. Here you go. So he says you can go. You got to call in every hour when you're on the road, and you got to take Quaz with you. Whoops, sorry. Come on, Billy, we're almost there, gang. Here we go. Let's try that again. Here's Quaz. That is a fantastic asset. Yes, shortwave radio, Helios. Exactly. You guys are getting it. They talk on shortwave radio. Yes, exactly. They have shortwave radio. That's how they communicate because it's reliable. It's simple. They don't have a complicated satellite communication system. They use shortwave radio. This is Quaz. The one that they've got is going to be considerably more beat up than this. This one's brand new. The one they're going to buy is going to be bought used. And this is kind of their all-purpose robot. I said she wouldn't go with the chaperone. She'll go with this guy because this is not a Lost in Space robot. This thing is not nearly so anthropomorphic. It's not a character that she talks to, and it's not a friend. The boy kind of thinks more of it as a friend. This is their all-purpose robot. This is what carries heavy things. And when they're someplace dangerous, this is who they send. And the reason that Dad agrees to let her go as long as this guy comes along is because this guy is capable of things like defense, scouting things out. If something were to happen, if the ship were to depressurize or something like that, he's capable of doing things like getting masks and so on. And he's a big robot, and he's so big he usually has to sit on the outside, which he doesn't mind at all. And he looks very much like a robot, and I'm trying to figure out how much personality to give him. I'm trying to figure out the voice to give him, because I don't want him to be the Lost in Space robot where he's really Will's best friend. I don't want him to be that. That's not. It's just done. You know, it's done, and I don't want to do things that have been done. But nevertheless, I think you know what this. Here's what this guy is. This guy is. I've got it. I've got it. This guy is the family dog. This is their dog. This is their German Shepherd. Excuse me. That's what he is. He's their dog. And that's exactly how I'm going to portray him. This is good. That's exactly, in fact, I never really thought of it quite so plainly. So I'm getting excited about it. This is the family dog. And that's exactly how much function and emotion I would like people to have with him. This robot will certainly put its so-called life on the line for any of them, and it will come to their rescue often enough, and it will be reliable enough, and it's intelligent enough to be treated like a family dog, and it's going to display about as much emotion as a family dog does. So what I mean by that is that thing will be loyal, it'll be dangerous to the extent that a good dog should be dangerous. You'll feel trusted and you'll feel comfortable with it around your kids. If you send them out with this thing, you'll feel like, do I want to send my daughter down the street at 2 o'clock in the morning? No, I don't particularly don't. But do I want to send her down the street at 2 o'clock in the morning with this highly trained German Shepherd? Yeah, I feel considerably better about that. Knowing that this German Shepherd's going to tear the throat out of anybody that goes after my daughter. And so that's about the level of a response I want him to have. So the young boy can't sit and talk about his problems with the dog and get back answers. He can talk to the dog, but he's not going to get advice from the dog. I don't want the robot to be that smart. I want it to be that loyal, and I want, this is a very, very common thing when people are lonely and especially when they're isolated. You hear stories all the time about people in prisons who have like pet cockroaches and things like that. One of the things that'll be interesting to play with from a story point of view, I'm going to go back to this picture one more time because I like it so much, will be how much of the affection that you feel for this creature is anthropomorphism. In other words, how much of it is human emotions that are projected onto a creature, and does the creature really feel emotions, or is it simply a toaster doing its job? And that's going to be a question that I think we need to leave it left open. I named him Cause, by the way. Anybody get the reference? I'll be curious to know if anybody gets the reference. Dad names this one. The little kid names the rover. It's called the rover. Lucky. Yeah, I'm just curious if anybody got. I tried to figure out a name for this that was cool. So anyway, Dad's going to call him Quaz, and so the question is this loyalty and this protectiveness that Quaz exhibits real? And if it's all programming, but it's still the same thing, then how is it not real? Dave Big Booty for the win. Yes, it's a little on the nose. Everybody gets it. That's good. I don't want it to be too arcane. I want the family to not get it because they're not big readers. Yes, it's they call him Quaz for Quasimodo. He's a hunchback, and I like that. It's not too immediately obvious. So these are the things, right? I mean, these are issues. Everybody has to deal with these issues. When do you let your daughter go out on a date? When do you let them cut loose? And what kind of a chaperone is acceptable to both parties? How much is reasonable background check on this boy or young man, and how much of it is not reasonable? How much of it is over concern, or you've got to be able to cut. You've got to be able to cut kids off. You got to let them go at some point. You cannot overprotect them, and that's another thing, by the way, that comes out of this, because the whole Pioneer storyline is about family. It's about the traditional nuclear, although in this case thermonuclear family. It is about a family and how much a family provides and how few of them there are today. And the nice thing about this environment is there are real threats out there. It's not just somebody said something nasty about you on Facebook, although in the beginning that will be things that will deeply upset this daughter. But you got to decide. And I do think there's a fundamental difference between boys and girls. One of these robots, in fact, I talked to Scott a couple days ago about this, and he said, been talking about this for so long, I'm working on a trailer and all this other stuff. He said, and I thought this was profoundly good advice, he said, what you need to do, Bill, is you need to do a 1 minute or a 2 minute movie that is a self-contained story and finish it, deliver it. And that's what we're working on right now. And that actually is going to be part of the Pioneer storyline. That's a good point. Roy Hamill said at some point she has to meet some of her old friends and be completely annoyed by how shallow and histrionic they are. That's a really excellent point. Yeah, that's really great, really great. I remember. So the plot line for the little 1 or 2 minute standalone story is I'm not going to get into details on it, but basically, Dad gets on the shortwave and calls their nearest neighbor, and he gets the guy on the radio and says, "Hey, Jim, I was wondering if I could borrow your bull for a day. I've got tons of stuff I need to get 400 feet up this slope, and it's just too steep. Quaz can't make it, and I need the bull." And the guy says, "Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll send him over right away." "Oh, it's okay. I'll pick him up. I can come by and get him." "No, you don't have to worry about it. I'll just send him." So the bull is a robot that looks about very much like the Boston Robotics robots, but he's big. It's like the size of a small horse. And it's a four-legged robot, and it can go up steep hills. If you've ever seen the Boston Robotic things of these guys, I know I played one of them dancing, but watching these things climb hills is incredible. So this guy needs this neighbor's specialized robot called the bull. It's called the bull because it's big, it's got a big head like a bull, and he says, "Can I borrow it?" And the guy says, "Yeah." "So do you want me to come get it?" "No, I'll just send it." So you get this great shot of this absolutely barren, completely wild, deserted, dark, alien planet plane at nighttime. And then there's a little plume of dust, and there's this robot going pretty fast. It's running 120 miles from this guy's house to this guy's house, and then the guy's going to use it. And I spent a day thinking about, okay, so yeah, the bull's going to analyze terrain with like sonar and lasers, and then he's going to have to calculate the best way up, and this will all be part of a screen and interacting with it, and Dad's going to have to decide, okay, so so he's got a top-down view, and he's trying to figure out how to work this thing, and little screen built into the side of the bull, and he says, okay, so he moves this cursor, pushes a button, he says, "I want you to go here." And then the bull just automatically starts scanning the terrain and starts laying up this kind of contour line and stuff. And then these three different lines come up, and then the screen says, "Do you want the fast route? Do you want the straight route? Or do you want the safe route?" And he has to decide which one of those. And if he decides he wants a safe route, it's a lot further out of the way, and it's not nearly as many steeper. Blah 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 blah. So I got this, and I think, okay, would the 10-year-old boy want to ride this thing? Yes, I think he would. Would the 16-year-old girl want to ride this thing? I'm not saying she wouldn't, but it doesn't seem as likely. And I think that's just the difference between boys and girls. That's not to say girls don't look girls and horses. If you're a young man and you want to meet women, go to an equestrian center. If you're a young woman, you want to meet men, go to an airport. But I can see this boy getting on this thing and grabbing onto it and have this thing run as fast as it can. And I don't know. I mean, I base this just on my experiences in reality. When I was down in Mexico with my wife and my daughter-in-law, they had a jet ski rental thing there. And I noticed that while the women would get on jet skis and go out there, most of the time they prefer to go on the back with the guys driving. And when a woman or a man were both driving for the first time, the guys were going a lot faster, which is why women live longer than men do. Yes, did I say daughter-in-law? I'm sorry, stepdaughter. Thank you for catching that. So I, believe it or not, never ridden a jet ski before. I've been scuba diving since I was 6. So I got on that thing and I just, got the turns, no problem. Fast as I could go. Took Natasha for a ride, slow down, okay. And then you just gun it for a little while. And the same thing with my stepdaughter. Gun it for just a few seconds. And they were so excited. And then it's like, "Can you slow down?" "Sure." But I was just running out there full speed because males are indestructible. These kind of things are interesting. They're interesting subjects to deal with. And is it sexist? No. It is certainly recognizing a difference between the amount of adventurousness between the average boy and the average girl. And I don't think it's saying, gee, the boy's better, because there's a lot that can go wrong if you're hanging on to a gigantic, 2-ton robot that's hauling ass over the terrain, leaping and jumping at 60 miles an hour. So, anyway, all of that is just to say this is the kind of thing that makes for interesting stories. And in that particular scene with the bull, I went to the trouble to flesh all that out, because that 1 minute, 2 minute stand around standalone movie comes about as a result of he has to borrow this robot. The robot comes. He works with the robot, gets on the radio. Thank you very much for the robot. I'm going to send it back now. No answer. No answer. No answer. We have an agreement. All the families have an agreement out here. If we are constantly trying to reach somebody and we don't hear anything back within 90 minutes, then it's time to start riding. So he rides out there, and that's where the actual guts of the story is. And then it's just little things. It's because this world, I understand this world, how it works so well. And I'm just going to wrap up with this. But I was thinking about this, okay, and I'm trying to make it real. I'm trying to make it believable. The business of him trying to figure out how to use this thing and what the robot would have to do in order to get up this hill. I like that. That's the stuff I talk about so many times. It's got the ring of truth to it. I can show the guy with this thing following up the hill, but he's not going to be following him. He wants it to just go up there on his own. So he has to figure out how to work it. And I'm thinking, if I had a mechanical robot bull that I could load hundreds of pounds of stuff onto in saddlebags, and I wanted to go up a steep cliff, how would I actually do that if I had that? So then you have to figure it out, and then you put it in the script, and it's cool. And since I like the image of this thing running across the entire planet for hundreds of miles on its own, it's completely autonomous. The thing is just using the GPS system that they have to put up there, and it's going from point A to point B. It's got a radiothermal generator. It's got a little nuclear source in there. It doesn't run out of fuel. Doesn't run out of gas. You can run this thing for nonstop for 7 years before you have to refuel it. And there's going to be a lot of that, by the way. There's going to be a couple scenes when somebody says, we could set up solar cells or wind panel, and the guy says, yeah, or we could just not dick around, and put in an RTG or a 20 megawatt fission plant and not have to deal with all this nonsense. That'll be fun too. But just for the little details. So he's sending the thing, and the guy who's got the bull says, "Do you need it? Will you need it before the morning?" He said, "No, I won't need it. You don't need to load it tonight or anything." No. He said, "Okay, then I'll probably send it the safe route. It's going to have to go almost twice as long, go around, come in from the back way." "Okay, no problem. Should get there around, I don't know, 2, 3 in the morning." "Okay, great, thanks." Then you're in this habitat with your protagonist family, and everybody's sleeping, and all of a sudden you hear this dong, 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 beep, beep. And it's the proximity sensors that Dad has put out there. Something is going by, and as the thing does the look, it's getting closer, and now it's hitting straight for the thing. And they have to get up there. And now, I know I'm getting too deep in the weeds here, but I just love talking about this stuff, and it's nice to have people who listen, my imaginary friends out there. Then I thought, okay, one of the things that Dad is going to have to do to keep his family alive is he is going to have to make it hurt if they do something that will get them killed. Got to make it hurt, because if he doesn't make it hurt, then they're going to die. If you're dealing with a world where you forget to close the door behind you, and that's the death of the whole family, then you have to make sure that that door gets closed. And when somebody doesn't close the door the right way, you gotta make it hurt. So I was thinking of a scene earlier, not connected to this story. The boy comes in. He comes in the airlock. Outer door closes. Inner door opens. He turns around, hits the panel, glass door there, watches the door close, and turns to Dad and says, "Hey, Dad," and then Dad just says, "Okay, so what did you just do wrong?" "What do you mean? What did you just do wrong, son?" I closed the door." He said, "Yeah, I know. I saw you close the door. Did you see it seal?" "Yeah." "No, you didn't. Don't lie to me. You didn't. You were looking at me. I could see the door, and you were looking at me before that door had fully closed." "Yeah, Dad, but it was almost closed. It was about that far." I said, "What if something had fallen and that door didn't close? What if a bolt had fallen out someplace, or something like this, or a coffee cup or something, and it had fallen there, and that door didn't seal? You said you would watch, you agreed that every time you went through that door, any of us went through that door, we stand and watch that door until the door seals, and you were looking at me and coming my way before that door sealed. Yeah, you're right, I'm sorry. No, now you're going to have to pay for it. It's not going to whip him, but it's got to be in his head. You cannot walk away from this door until you visually confirm that the door has sealed closed. And then the kid will say, but Dad, it's the safety interlock. If the thing didn't close, the safety interlock. I said, well, what if something happened to the safety interlock, son? You know, what if the horn burned out? Or what if the light wasn't working? Or what if it just didn't feel like working that day? What if water had gotten in there and overridden the circuit or burned through the circuit on the safety interlock, and you didn't see that door seal, and somebody comes in from the outside, and this entire place just immediately decompresses, and we're all stone cold dead because you didn't do what we agreed we would all do. This kind of conversation. And then the boy starts feeling really bad and goes in his room and he starts to cry because he's been yelled at and he knows he's wrong. And Mom comes in and tries to soften it up because that's what moms do. And Mom says to Dad, you know, you were pretty hard on him. He says, I know that. You should go in maybe and just talk to him a little bit. No, it's got to hurt, honey. I know it's hard on him. I don't want him to, I don't like him being upset in there, but he needs to be upset in there. He needs to feel it. He needs to learn this stuff or we're all going to get killed out here. That kind of stuff to me is absolutely fantastic. Fantastic. So I was thinking, all right, so they're lying there asleep. And everybody's asleep and they hear this ding, ding, ding and bing, bing, bing. And then it's the proximity alarm. And somewhere in here, without bashing people on the head with it, they're all tired, but Dad has set out these rules for survival, and they have to obey them, or else they're all going to die. And so one of the rules that Dad has set up is, if the proximity alarm goes off, you have to visually confirm, you can do this on a TV screen, but you have to visually confirm what it is before that alarm goes off. You can't just say cancel the alarm. It's obviously the bull. This is when it's expected. Somebody has to get up out of bed, walk over, and either look out the window, actually not look out the window, confirm on the screen that this little object inside the green box is in fact what we're expecting, and that's what set off the alarm, and then you can deactivate it that way. You don't just get to sit in bed and roll over and hit a button. And all of these things to me are just so damn interesting, and they're so cool. And I've never seen anybody do these things, ever. Ever, 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 ever. Nope, never seen it. I was watching, I'm almost caught up with The Expanse now. I was watching an episode last night, and certainly not a spoiler for those of you who've seen up to the present day. I'm just about 3 or 4 episodes from where 5th season ended, and Amos is down on the planet with this Mao, one of the Mao sisters, which I'll get to in a second. And they're in the woods, and there's snow on the ground, and they're just dressed in clothes, and they've got like a United Nations, like a refugee blanket around them. And they're walking, and she twists her leg or something like this. And I'm watching the scene, and I'm looking at this. And this guy who plays this Amos is a fantastic actor. The woman's not too bad either, but this guy's grand. He's fantastic. And I'm watching the scene, and I'm saying, these people don't look cold to me. They don't look cold to me at all. And how did they not catch that? How did the director not catch that? They're out in the middle of the woods. It's nighttime. They're freezing. There's snow everywhere. They're wearing T-shirts or a long sleeve shirt. None of them have warm jackets on. They've got this blanket, and he takes his blanket off and gives it to this woman who's been hurt, and he kind of wraps it around her, and she just lets it hang there. And I thought, how hard would it be for him to put this around her and have her grab it and just do this? And how hard would it be for this guy, who's obviously a tough guy? He's the toughest guy out there. He's a great, great character. But how hard would it be for just a moment for him to just do something to show that now that he doesn't even have this thin blanket, he's cold too? And it's little things like this. It's little things like this that don't happen. And you got to get these details right, or else you don't get that immersion. And that's what really good storytelling is, a science fiction or not. You got to get you. If it's not there, I don't think 1 in 1,000 people missed it, but I missed it. And while other people probably didn't miss it, if it had been there, then they would have realized, God damn, it's cold out there. It's cold. What's the point of putting your characters out in the middle of the wilderness in the middle of nighttime with nothing but rags if you're not trying to show hardship? And if you don't show that they're cold, if you just show them in a cold environment and they're not looking or acting cold, then you don't get it. And it just seemed like such a simple mistake and so easy to fix. It just seemed to me like if I'm the director, I say, hey, you know what? I think West Cheatham, whatever plays. Hey, great read, Wes. By the way, let's just do it again. You're out here freezing, man. It's really cold out here. Oh yeah, no problem. And then it'd be great. By the way, and I'm done now. I'm sorry I didn't get to more questions, but welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. It's not lost on me that The Expanse has a guy who nearly destroys the Earth, and his name is Mao. His last name is Mao. The whole first season is pursuing one of the daughters whose name is Mao. And then there are 2 other daughters remaining. One of them tries to destroy and sabotage these things because she's trying to kill the hero. And she ends up becoming kind of a heroine. And the other daughter, who's also been part of this family, that nearly destroys humanity through this illegal and immoral experiment, she goes on to become Secretary General of the United States, of the United Nations. What a horrible thing to say. And I thought, wow, that's working out pretty well for the Maos, isn't it? Now there's a line between paranoia and awareness, and I don't know what that line is, but watching that, I thought to myself, they sure are trying to normalize that name, aren't they, Mao? When the name Mao appears in my story, it's going to be the name of a Chinese cruiser, and one person's going to say, I guess you kill 50 million people, you get a real nice ship named after you. Something along those lines, not quite so on the nose, but you get the idea. And I just realized they're like, yeah, okay, so this guy is the bad guy, and his name is Mao, and his daughter's a rebel, and all of this stuff, and her name's Mao, and then the other daughter, who the whole family should be locked up forever. No, she goes on to become Secretary General. Her name's Mao, and I just thought, interesting choice of names. I noticed they didn't, I noticed that the daughter's name wasn't Julie Stalin, and it wasn't Julie Hitler. And some people say you're overreacting, to which I reply, yeah, but it wasn't Julie Hitler or Julie Stalin who was leader of the Earth. It was Julie Mao. And Mao killed more people than Stalin and Hitler combined, and that is actually kind of an achievement when you think about it. Nobody noticed, nobody seemed to care. I care. As somebody put in the comment section, I think this comes from Red Letter Media. You may not have noticed, but your brain did. And I see these things. That's one of the reasons why sometimes I just get so gobsmacked is the only word, Okay. All right. So now that's what, when you talk to young people, when you say Mao, they're going to think Julie Mao. They don't know who Mao Zedong is. And I come back to that issue. Are you overreacting? Maybe. But how would they feel if it was Julie Hitler or Julie Stalin or something like that? I don't think they'd do it. So that has to actually lead me to another conclusion, which is why then? Why? I don't know anything about how that show's financed. I do know, however, that China understands this very, very well, and they spend an awful lot of money on things like Mulan and all the rest of this stuff, and making sure that Tom Cruise doesn't have any mission patches from Taiwan in there, and so on. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's gonna do well. And now to build that little 1 or 2 minute movie. If you get a chance, if you have Netflix, Love, Death, and Robots. And if I don't remember what the name of the homesteading article was, but if you scroll down, it looks like cell animation, cartoon animation, and it's just a really, really good story. I'm going to go home and watch it right now. Okay, that'll do it, I guess, for tonight here. I'll have that moving back to America tomorrow, and then I think I'm going to abandon this idea of writing them and making them more produced. I think I'm going to have to go back to live shows and just pull them up. I'm trying to find something that works, and I'm just not getting enough of these done. I wanted something that had more quality, fewer of them, but I'm just not getting enough done. So I'll put out a word, and we'll probably go back to some version of that live show. I'm just trying to find a balance there for that, because one of those shows a week is not enough. I was hoping I could do 3 written ones, and it's just not happening. But the one tomorrow is going to be good. And it's got lots of statistics and research and all the other stuff that people like. So anyway, that'll do it. I am heading home. It's 8:45 here. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for all the kind words, and always for keeping all of us going. If I do it, I will... No, I'm not going to be live tomorrow. Definitely not live tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm doing the immigration one. I'm sorry, the national park one. I will let you know. Might be next week, and I think I will probably move it from 8 to 9 Pacific. One of the reasons I walked it back was because I was getting 4 or 5 hours sleep, and there's no reason that I have to do it at 8. I do have to do it live, though, that's for sure, because that live audience means I have to be here and get it done every day. So anyway, there you go. But no, definitely not live tomorrow. I've got the other one recorded and done. Just have to do some posts on it and stuff, so I'll get that up tomorrow. We'll get it going. Okay. Hail Vectron to all of you out there. And I cannot recommend Harry and Paul enough. And Paul Whitehead is I think the most brilliant comic actor I've ever seen. We talked earlier about the Quare sketches, Quare. If you have a chance, you want to really see some really clever comedy, look up Harry and Paul and look for The Surgeons. It's about these 2 doctors who are unbelievably well educated and unbelievably kind of blasé about how well their lives are, but Paul Whitehouse, his character Sheridan, it's just a beautiful thing to watch. It's like watching a Fabergé egg or some kind of, one of these mechanical swans made out of silver or something. It's like he's just so bloody good. He does a scene, Paul Whitehouse does a scene where he's a number of rounds on a sketch where he's a soccer coach for the English national team, and he talks to he'll talk to a Russian player, and he'll talk to him in Russian. And then he'll talk to a Chinese guy, and he'll talk to him in Chinese. And he'll talk to an African guy, and he'll talk to him in, he'll start singing his kind of African kind of harmonic languages out of him. And it's so bloody good. He's so good. He may be the best mimic I've ever seen. I realized last night, to my utter astonishment, having watched a lot of these things, that if I could meet anybody in the world, Paul Whitehouse would be in the top 3, and he may be my top choice. I just think he's unspeakably brilliant. Harry Enfield is great, but Paul Whitehouse is in a league of his own. They did a special, like a retroactive on their careers, their fictional careers as radio DJs, Smashy and Nicey, and Paul Whitehouse plays this DJ who had a completely isolated childhood, and it's so subtle. I saw it and I just had to back it up and watch it again. It's not going to mean much to most of you, But he walks into this room and he's basically got this accent and he says, this is my room. When I bought my own Fabulous Funny Farm here, I had the movers bring it over and recreate it the way it was back at home, exactly the same way here in the house. I remember when I was talking to my mother, and it's just that one little pause. It's so perfect. He's just, when he says the word mother, he hangs for like an eighth of a second, and it's so subtle, but it's so clear and it's so funny. It's like he's talking to mother. Incredible. It's incredible. I love them to death, both of them. They're brilliant comic actors, and watching a lot of them lately keeps my spirits up. And like I say, one of the things that makes me so sad is watching all the comic. You could never say that today. So, yeah. Maybe not today, but you will again in the future, by God, if I have anything to say about it. All right, and you as well. Thanks for joining us. I expect we will see you here next Thursday, right here on the Stratosphere Lounge. Thanks. See you next time.